Good morning to all of you. Thank you for coming to this meeting. We are going to begin. The meeting that we are going to share today is to share the policy recommendations about fish spawning aggregations. And the objective of the meeting is to present this document and the recommendations and policy identified in each country, along with some scientific results that support them, in order to identify the steps to be able to take and to translate them into concrete actions that strengthen the conservation and management of fish aggregations in the region. We are going to have three speakers. Stuart Fulton, he is the Director of Development and Community and Biodiversity. He's going to share the document. We have Antonella Rivera. She is the main leading research in Coral Reef Alliance, and Silja Ramírez, Director of the Programa Mares Vivos, Fundación para el Ecodesarrollo y Conservación. And they are going to talk to us about all the recommendations and policy that have been implemented and the actions that have been carried out. Some recommendations: if you need interpretation in the Zoom controls, you can click on the interpretation symbol. You can click on the language that you would like to hear. The meeting is going to be carried out in Spanish, so if you need English, please choose the English option. And if you want to hear the interpreted language only, click mute on original audio. Some basic rules about the meeting. We encourage a space of learning and respect. Microphones and cameras will be turned off during the webinar. Please write your full name, country, and organization in the chat. You can post your questions on the chat or in the Zoom question box. And your questions will be forwarded and answered by the speaker at the end of the presentation. A disclaimer: the opinions expressed are the sole responsibility of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the opinion or position of Marfund. A small description of each of our speakers. Stuart Fulton is the Director of Development and Community and Biodiversity. He has worked over 15 years in marine conservation and in sustainable fisheries in Mexico and Latin America, with a particular focus on citizen science, marine reserve, and fish spawning aggregation sites. Recently, Stuart has promoted the use of technology in the small-scale fishery in Latin America to increase the impact of citizen science. Antonella Rivera, she is a recognized scientist with more than 14 years studying the conservation of marine ecosystem. She studied in the Universidad Autónoma de Honduras and in Spain, and her vast research evidence with more than 26 publications has focused on local fishing communities and aquaculture in Europe and Latin America. She has worked since 2017 with the Coral Reef Alliance organization in Western Caribbean, and she combines an interdisciplinary focus with innovative strategies to address conservation needs in Tela. Silja Ramirez, she is a biologist with a master's in environmental studies with more than 18 years of experience in environmental and social ambience. She is now director of the Programa de Mares Vivos in Fundaeco, leading strategic actions about the integral management of the marine protected areas. Her trajectory works with the design and implementation of projects focused on conservation of biodiversity, sustainable management of resources, community inclusion, and gender focused. More than 15 years dedicated to conservation, protection, and management of the marine ecosystems, working with marine coastal areas, mainly with environmental education, development of capacity, marine monitoring, and other alternative livelihood. She's been working with more than 10 years, working with young people, developing developing abilities in the fishing families. We welcome you again, and we thank you for joining us in the presentation of the document about policy regarding fish aggregation sites. I'm going to give the word to Stuart Fulton now. Thank you, Michelle. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, yes. So thank you for being in the webinar today. I'm just going to go over some important facts and then talk about what we generated. And it's very important to talk about how this is all in the focus of the Marfish project, which we have been working on for the past 4 to 5 years in the 4 countries of the Mesoamerican Reef. So fish spawning aggregation sites, they occur all around the world. They're not specific to the tropical regions, but the most studied are in fact in the more tropical areas. However, most of them, as you can see, the majority of them have not been studied. Only 25% have data a long time, and the ones that are monitored don't present a very positive future because many of them are declining, and there are even sites where fish don't arrive to spawn, but they are always very, very important for trophic chains. There's a high concentration of feeding resources during fish aggregation sites. This video is in Mexico, near Siancan, where the more than 20 years the fishing community has been investigating with other groups of scientists, and it's the Nassau grouper spawning site, the largest one that we have found in Mexico. And obviously, this is important implications. For example, in Belize, we have examples of spawning sites where whale sharks come and feed from the eggs and the larvae produced during these reproductive events. And it's important to highlight that, for example, in groupers, it has to do with the full moon between December and March. Throughout the Mesoamerican Reef, on the map on the left, we have all the sites that have been reported. They come from just scientific observations, or others even from fishing community observations. They're not always found, or it might be places where there is very little information. And in the right map, you can see where there are protected areas, if they are protected or if they're not protected. So you can see that all the red ones are in protected areas. And the Mesoamerican region is probably one of the highest protected area with fish spawning aggregation sites that are protected. And that has, of course, implications on the populations and the management. Just to explain a little bit about which species we are revising, up on the left, we have the groupers. I know that each country has their own names for their species, but I want to highlight, of course, the first 3. The Nassau grouper, which is the most emblematic species and is in critical danger according to the IUCN Red List. The black grouper, that also reaches to larger sizes and is also reported as almost threatened. And the Goliath grouper is the largest fish on the reef, and this one, well, according to the IUCN, is just vulnerable because there is healthy populations in Florida, but in our region, it is a very scarce fish. And below we have the snappers, where we have the cubera and the mahogany snapper. They are the most vulnerable, according to the IUCN. So before we go into the next section, it's very important to mention that in the past things have changed. We never find pictures like the one below. Right now, when anybody captures a big grouper, it reaches like social media and the news because it's very strange. And now we have cases in our region that we can't even find compared to what, for example, the researcher Alfonso Aguilar that studied many of these aggregation sites, and he documented it through the 80s and the 90s. And he documented how a very important fish aggregation site just disappeared in these years because it was where they collected and when they fished most of their fish. So with the data that we have, sometimes we don't have a lot of data. Um, in the graph above, we have the captures in Quintana Roo. The dark green line above is groupers, and the blue line is snappers. And we can see that they reached their peak around 2007, and from then, mostly all the species have been declining in the importance of the capture of fish throughout the region. A lot because of diverse regions and overfishing, especially focused on the fish aggregation sites. Below, we have a graph regarding Belize, where we have gathered data since 1920, and you can see the tendency to decrease towards the green square, which is managed sustainably, and in the red in a fishing that is not sustainable. So the little white dot on the graph is 1987, and you can see that since that time the fishery was very highly affected, and it is accelerated when there is harpoon introduction and other catching techniques, and we see a slight improvement in the previous years because Belize started protecting the fish aggregation sites, and they have a good management for the Nassau grouper, but the biomass is already very low. So we can kind of like, we do another reconstruction of the data where we have data of even around 100 tons of capture of the fish in Belize, and then you can see the time is going by, and now you can see in 2001, for example, they only saw 18 fish observed, and that is the day where it was protected. So it's been protected for more than 20 years, but we are starting for a very, very small biomass. So any improvement, any recuperation is going to take a long time. So to highlight the most important threats is overfishing, which may happen sometimes. Even legal fishing can be during reproductive events. It can be also like throughout the year. Well, illegal fishing, where we have marine protected areas or no-take zones or fishing bans. Well, those are when the fishing affects the most. Well, we have climate change as well. Because it introduces a uncertainty factor, because the fish reproduction sites seem to be affected by currents and temperature, and well, climate change is affecting these biophysical conditions. And some reports that we have seen from like the 80s and 90s, even talking to fishermen, they report, for example, aggregations in December, and us starting in 2010, we have never found grouper aggregations in December. It seems like they have been moving towards January, February, and even March, possibly attributed to the changes in temperature. Along the Mesoamerican Reef, we have 4 countries that share this ecosystem, and there are no fish that belongs to one country. Any animal can migrate. Some groupers may migrate even 300 kilometers towards their fish aggregation sites, and so they easily go across borders. We also know that the lack of the limited vigilance and the insufficient resources, especially in the fish aggregation times, uh, because those times of January, February, and March are hard to have resources. And of course, habitat loss because of reef and mangrove degradation, because they are crucial ecosystems for the development of the fish. And before we go to the next section, we have these like 6 main management of fisheries. We have minimum fishing size. We have bans, when periods in which you can't fish, specifically and mostly for reproduction times. We have permits, control efforts. We have catch quotas, and highlighted, and the one that the tool that we have used the most, because you can make a relatively small no-take zone, that it doesn't really impact the sector so much, and but you are actually protected the most critical time for the fish and the different fishing techniques and tools. And in the 4 countries, we have a lot of different regulations for groupers and snappers. We all have regulations for the Nassau grouper, but for example, only Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras is from December to March. In Mexico, it's only from February to March. So the ban is a little bit shorter, and it could possibly include January, at least for the spawning dates. Mexico, for example, that's the only country where this ban covers all groupers, unlike in Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras. There are fishing size limits. We have to highlight Belize because they have very good fishing sizes regarding minimum and maximum sizes. The maximum size allows the larger reproductive animals to produce juveniles, but in other countries, they don't, like Guatemala and Honduras, they don't have any regulations, and in Mexico, they only have regulation about the red grouper that is not really fished in the Caribbean, and they have a very small minimum fishing size. So, and with snappers, we have mostly no bans, except in Guatemala for a very short period. And all countries have fish spawning aggregation sites inside marine protected areas. So this is like a summary of all the monitoring data that we have collected. The figure below, in our region, we have a lot of sites, but most of them don't have a proper monitoring strategy. It's very hard and expensive to reach the sites, and even to do it during diving makes it even more expensive. Some show that some are recovering, but many are still declining in biomass. Something important to mention as a resource, more than the Mesoamerican Reef, this is a genetic study that was done around 10 years ago. And you can see that the species in the Mesoamerican Reef, from red line B, are genetically different to other areas in the Caribbean, which means that the actions that we take in our area do have a very important impact on the local recruitment. And even in Belize, in the closer atolls to the land, have a different genetic composition to those out in the ocean. So it's important to recognize that the actions that we have in our region will have an impact. And very, very quickly to go over the recommendations, the ones that we recommended in the document. In Mexico, the fish spawning aggregation sites don't have an official recognition as their critical importance. So we need to find a way to recognize these specific zones. Number 2, the ban in the grouper ban in Mexico, in Caribbean, in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean are treated as the same ban, and they're actually very different species, very different spawning sites, especially because in the Gulf of Mexico, they mostly capture the red grouper, which is very different to the species in the Caribbean. There should be a larger size in the Caribbean, and again, unlink it from the red grouper because it's a different behavior and different sizes. Start talking about the snapper fisheries because they don't have a lot of information, and talking about the marine protected areas, many of them were established before there wasn't a lot of information from spawn aggregation sites. For example, in Chinchorro, there was a consultation period with the community, and the protected areas are very close to the spawning aggregations, but they do not cover the sites themselves. And they mentioned that they protect the spawning sites, but they are around 500 to 1 kilometer actually away from actually protecting them. In Belize, they already have a wide network of marine protected areas to protect spawning aggregation sites. In the moment of creating the majority from 2000 to 2005, they had some acquired licenses for larger fishermen that are even still running, and they give rights to the larger fishermen. So the idea would be to reduce these licenses with time. The next recommendation would be to replicate the excellent NASA grouper regulations to other grouper species and other snapper species, because it's a great example, but the other species are not considered. Integrate and align marine reserve networks, and increase strategic vigilance and monitoring. We know that that's a challenge, and try to focus it on the key moments where we know that there are key aggregations. Empower the fishermen to protect monitoring and implement technology to improve monitoring. As I mentioned, the monitoring is very expensive, and we're always looking for more mechanisms for these monitoring. In Guatemala, we need to start using the bans, both for groupers and snappers, strengthen the community participation, and promote proper fishing practices, update the marine protected area management plans to include fish spawning aggregation sites, and of course, continue to characterize and monitor the sites throughout the time. And this also includes point 3, but also the legal framework regarding fisheries and updating everything regarding fishing. And in Honduras, create areas so that reposition of fish as aggregation sites and have like a proper monitoring throughout the time, and just to have informed decisions and be able to apply the policy, establish management time throughout the time, and establish those sites where we need to be doing more research in protecting these areas, and of course promote a lot the fishing sector in their actions to protect and monitor the fish spawning aggregation sites, especially those that occur in their fishing sites, and support them in the long term so that we can provide a long-term protection. I'm not going to go in detail to everything that I have here, but this is like general recommendations along the Mesoamerican Reef. First, of course, the regional coordination. Right now with the Marshfish project was a large effort to look for those measures in the four countries, and we need to continue working towards effort this way. We need to make sure that with the information that we generate, we sometimes don't know about the previous results. So we need to standardize the monitoring, and so that we can have tendencies along the whole region. I'm going to go to the last one, but of course we need to address climate change because it's generating a lot of uncertainty. So we need to have adaptive management of the sites and understand how the fishing bans and the spatial bans have to do, and how the currents and how the water parameters are changing, and also adapt to these changes. And for the moment, this is the summary, and thank you. And I think we're gonna talk a little bit more specifically about each country's efforts. Thank you, Stuart, for presenting these recommendations and what is happening in each of the countries. If anybody has an observation or a comment, we can do it right now, or you can hold on to it and go to the presentation from Antonella, and she's going to talk about some of the results that they have generated based on the policies implemented in. So I don't see any questions, so I think Antonella, you can continue. Thank you very much, Michelle. Good morning to all of you. Today we're going to present the work that we have been doing with the fish spawning aggregation sites in Honduras, led by Coral Reef Alliance and Roatan Marine Park, and this is always in alliance. The project has been supported by many funders, but a lot of the technical support from the Bay Islands Committee. Just to give you a little bit of information, before we started with this project, all of the information that we had about fish spawning aggregation sites was mostly focused on local ecological knowledge. So it's very important, but it's always important to validate how this local ecological knowledge is focused. So we had a project where we identified what the divers and fishermen had reported. So they had 19 potential grouper aggregation sites and 2 from snappers. And in that moment, actually only 2 had been validated, 2 in Cayes Cochinas, and 1 in Guanaja, in Caldera del Diablo. So during these, amongst these recommendations, we also had 3 more that hadn't been validated. So to be able to recognize these areas and to be able to work with them, we did 2 studies. One was more focused on ecological, focused on the fish spawning aggregations that had been identified in the Bay Island Marine Park, Sandy Bay, Texas Cordelia, and Men of War. That hadn't been identified in that TNC study, and another socioeconomic study to see how the bans had the effect of the bans in the fishing communities. And they're going to talk about that in further presentations. So to be able to administer this, we did many sampling, many monitoring from 2021 to 2023, 124 days monitored. We recorded physical parameters, and we had hydrophones as well. We also had surveys amongst different communities, 3 training workshops. Out of all of this, we published 3 scientific articles. We started 2 pilot projects and 2 legally recognized fishery associations. This is like the general revision. So what do we know about our fish spawning aggregation sites? We know that in Texas, the area of Texas, we know that it's not a fish spawning aggregation site. We monitored for 2 continuous years with hydrophones and divers, and we couldn't really find it. There's the hypothesis that it might be extinct because we did see fish aggregating, but we couldn't really see the spawning. So it was very important to go to the field and check what is really going on. So the ones that we were able to confirm was Sandy Bay from the tiger grouper in March and April, that we have seen in other regions. We have earlier spawning events, and along the research period, we saw that the fishing numbers were increasing, which is very, very good news. And it's important to see the size of the group of the animals. And we can see that they have been reducing in biomass. So we have more animals, but they are reducing in biomass. So we not only need to protect our spawning areas, but we need to protect the interconnectivity, because how do these big fish get to the spawning aggregation sites? And in this area, we saw a lot of territorial behavior. And we also found another site called the Man of War, also a spawning aggregation site for tiger groupers. But we only saw 24 individuals, which is a very small aggregation. So we think that it is like a spillage zone. And what we think is that because there are some that couldn't spawn in Sandy Bay because of these territorial behaviors, they have moved to this Man of War area. And we continue to monitor to see how this area is developing. And from here, we have the aggregation in Cordelia. This is one that many divers have been reported, but no actual proper quantitative data had been taken. So what we saw with hydrophones and with divers, Cordelia Bank is a very important, interesting site where we have the spawning of 4 different grouper species that happen at very deep areas, around 20 meters depth. For example, the Nassau grouper and the yellowfin reproduce in April, whereas the black grouper's peak was close to March. The data below is the hydrophones, and above is the diver data. And so what do we know about these fish spawning aggregation closures, and what is the effect on the fishing communities? When we analyze the impact in Cayman Crown, we thought that this was an area where the Honduran fishermen didn't go. But it's mostly the ones that are closer to the limit between Belize and Guatemala and Honduras. So we do know that this area is very important to the fishermen, but only 1.5 actually depend on this area. So this shows that even if we close in one country, it's going to have a domino effect on other countries. And this is why, for example, projects like the Marfish efforts is very important, because they are taking all of the countries into account and all the communities into account, so that we can actually know the big scale impact on this. So from this, we worked with the fishermen, with the community, for the community, to be able to understand how we could limit this fishing that was being illegal and undocumented. So this is a methodology that we have shared in international efforts. And what they said was that we need better governance to include more groups, for example, like the fishermen, to develop capacity and improve and support, and how to generate the necessary knowledge to be able to advance through this situation. And the older fishermen highlighted how it's important to reinforce the environmental conscience that has been lost throughout the years. And we need to diversify livelihoods, not change completely. They're always going to be fishermen, but also provide alternative livelihoods so that they can balance each other out, and have collateral areas. For example, establishing that area between Belize and Guatemala and Honduras, have a conversation between the government, so that all are on board with controlling the fishing actions. And how do we promote the social acceptability? Oof. We worked with different communities. We need to know that it's not only fishing oriented, but it's community oriented. The summary, we have 72 fishermen that gained skills that didn't have before. We were able to legally institute 11 fisher associations. Two fishers association got their legal status. Two fishers association received equipment to develop ecotourism projects. And there was knowledge sharing material so that all the communities can have the information in their hands. So as recommendations, we have so if you can give a summarize of the video, because many of us weren't able to listen to what you were saying during the video. So yeah, basically this is what we talked about during the video. Uh, this is a summary of what we said. So we worked on capacity building for the communities, for sustainable tourism, project management, and alternative livelihood, but also to strengthen the associations. And we started from the beginning asking them what they needed, what they wanted, and we developed a project so that we could address their needs, and understand uh, how to address and how to achieve that legal status. Um, so they can apply to funding and support, and two of them received equipment to develop ecotourism projects. So as I said before, it's not that they stop being fishermen, is that they have alternative livelihood, other tools that they can use to do fishing, but also to do ecotourism. And that way we can reduce a little bit the fishing pressures, especially during the fish spawning aggregation sites, especially with those illegal fishing areas like Cayman Crown for Honduran fishermen. Um, so supporting a little bit what Stuart said, it's very important to expand the patrols in all of the areas, because many times we just focus on marine protected areas because they have been established a long time ago, and sometimes they're not even protecting the fish spawning aggregation sites. And even though the site itself isn't outside of the marine protected area, but all the corridors that they need to travel through their areas to reach the spawning aggregation sites. We need to support interinstitutional collaboration. We need to have everybody sitting down on the table, NGOs, government, local organizations, so that we can work together in monitoring and protection. Also, it is important to include local actors, not only institutions, but fishermen and in local community actors that their livelihoods depend on these fisheries, and continue validating the fish spawning aggregation sites. As we know, there's very few validated zones, and most is ecological knowledge, as we mentioned, because it's hard to go validate, and we start implementing new technologies. The hydrophones have been a high help, thanks to COVID, but there's other tools like wave lighters that we could explore to be able to gather more data, because it's very hard to dive during the spawning aggregation sites. And it's, of course, very important to expand the no-take zones, depending on how we call them in our countries. But the most important thing in these areas is, of course, yes, no fishing during these spawning aggregations, but also protect those corridors and those migration corridors. So what have we achieved based on these recommendations and the knowledge that we have acquired? So in Honduras, thanks to the support of the technical committee from Bay Islands, Cayos Cochinos, and Fuxa, and other important actors, we were able to talk with the fisheries and agriculture secretary, and we established a national ban for the black grouper, the yellow grouper, and the tiger grouper, which are all the ones that we have seen spawn in our areas. So they used our information to generate this policy. We have established sentinel site monitoring in the Bay Island National Park, based on the ocean conditions and the availability of personnel. Um, we are working to establish a critical roadmap for the establishment of these no-take zones, not only to stay with the knowledge within our country, but also to share it and replicate it in other countries, as I mentioned, was very important. And we have these two newly legalized fishery associations that are very motivated and willing to participate. And they have these two livelihood diversification projects. So it's important to know that we protect what we know. And for this, we need to validate the sites, but we also need to involve the community participants. Thank you very much. I am available for answering any questions, or you can write me an email with any more questions. Thank you very much, Antonella. I don't see any questions. If you have any questions, you can write them down, or if you have one right now, you can maybe leave them for the end. And we're going to give the word to Silja Ramirez, that she's going to talk about the application of these recommendations and the efforts that they have done in Guatemala. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Today, I am going to present all the recommendations of the public policy focused on fish spawning aggregation sites that have been carried out in Guatemala. And I'm just going to give you a walkthrough of the actions that we have carried out to implement these policies in management and conservation subjects, not only in the fish protected sites, fish refuges, but also regarding the conservation management of ecosystem and resources because of the connectivity that these hold. Sorry, the slide isn't moving. Okay, so to give you a little bit of context, we work in the Caribbean area of Guatemala, which you can see is represented by 3 marine protected areas. You can see the multiple use Silvestre Punta de Manabique, Special Manning Corona Caiman, and we have also in other areas determined by CONAP, Cayman Crown area, and the Santo Tomas Bay area. In the little circles, you can see the communities that are represented and that we work with, focused on the coastal marine environments of the Caribbean. So to begin and to complement a little bit what Stuart was mentioning about the recommendations, if you can see, a long time ago, we started implementing these actions that are going to strengthen the recommendations that have been presented today. And one of them is the national and local governance. We have worked with the Environmental Legislative Agenda and the Environmental Natural Resources Commission to talk about the subjects regarding the coastal marine environments, to generate laws and the necessary rules to strengthen these actions. For example, a water-related law to establish marine protected areas as nucleus for a long-term protection. We also worked with the fisheries direction. If you can see these pictures, these are ministry arrangements talking about fishing resources. For example, the boats that we have in the Caribbean we used to have 170 boats that weren't functional, and this agreement reduced the quantity to 80. And this ministerial agreement basically limited the fishing efforts in the areas that we intervene. We also work with the Environmental and Natural Resources Commission in the subject to declare areas and to strengthen management actions and conservation actions that are needed. And we also worked with different platforms like the Intersectoral Coastal Marine Alliance that integrates not only the Caribbean, but also the Pacific in Guatemala. And the idea is to generate conservation and management efforts, then strengthen all the actions that different institutions are carrying out, not only in the Caribbean, but also in the Pacific. And many that are here, like Marfund, are part of this alliance. Another important subject is regarding governance is the land management plan, and this is a tool that is organizing either by different local territories that can give us context on how to deal with governance and how to deal with the use of natural resources. And it gives us a context of coastal development and the organization of the territory and the planning, the spatial planning. So you can see that we talked with the mayors and how the development of the strategies were going to be carried out. And we visited the different areas on how to prioritize this coastal development, and all the actions that they were able to implement. And we not only identified the environmental conditions, but also the risk and threats that these environmental areas may face with the development of communities and cities. We see the impact of specific ideas that have an effect on the environment. And this is a way to have an idea on how to organize the local areas focused on marine coastal areas that has a direct link with the marine ecosystems. Another subject that is led with the Ministry of Environment, but we also talked about was the reactivation of the Coastal Marine Roundtable. These roundtable are mostly focused and led by the legislation of the environment and the management plan established, that's called the PEHIN. And these documents have very specific objectives and very specific actions focused on environmental and economical aspects that all organizations that work in these areas have to develop a plan to strengthen our activities, so that we can support our activities. We also established governance platforms in fisheries led by the fishing directives. And we support with the call for the people, and we support with the discussions. But these roundtables are basically a platform of communication between the government and the fishermen. Sometimes the NGOs are involved so that they can discuss about different fisheries. These roundtables are carried out before the ban seasons, so that we know where they fish, what techniques they use, if it's approved under the law, the fishing sizes, if they are following the minimum fishing size to the specific species. And so when we reach that ban calendar, we just need to socialize it. We already know that everybody agrees with it. So this year, we reached 20 years of the ban calendar in Guatemala, and we are doing all the actions so that we can fulfill this ban calendar. And this leads me to the next slide, which is control and surveillance. So this is very complicated to work it, as Antonella mentioned before, because control and surveillance is supported by the ban calendar. We develop a surveillance calendar with the fishing director, so that we have a technician as well that supports this efforts. The surveillance is carried out based on the ban calendar that was established at the beginning of the season. And as management and conservation tools, we have recovery zones, fishing recovery zones. We have a network of fishing recoveries that have not been officially declared, but we have conservation agreements with the communities where they have accepted the conservation of key ecosystem and the recuperation of specific species in the sites through conservation agreements and alternatives to fisheries. So right now we are working with the fisheries direction and the legalization of some of the associations. And we are in this process. Um, this process is a participative effort. The communities, um, the communities ask for these fishing recovery sites because they know that the fisheries has reduced the biomass of the fish, and what they do with us is design based on the information and the socioeconomical information and biological scientific information. we design in we design this recovery area, and we see what are the benefits long term with the creation of these areas, and they sign an agreement in which they say that they agree with this area that has been established. And then we talk with the fishing directives, um, and we tell them that the community agrees with this planification, and then we socialize with the fishermen that we are going to work a full expedient with the fishing directors, and that this recovery site is going to be approved. So for this, we have surveillance in the areas because a part of the calendar, the ban calendar, is focused on the recovery sites, and we also do biological monitoring constantly just to see how the biomass is changing and if the ecosystem itself has a better health index. And we also look for alternative livelihoods to fishing. Because we know that having no-take zones is complicated for the fishermen. So we give a follow-up to all of these actions. Regarding biological monitoring, we work with different subjects. We talk about everything that is reported after the fisheries, and that helps for the ban calendar. But it's also information that we see regarding those recovery zones that we established. We also coordinate with the DHEMAR, with some bathymetric surveys to understand the bottom and the geomorphology of each of the sites, so that we have better information to plan all these plans that we carry out. We also work with these fish recovery sites, the conservation agreements. As I mentioned before, this is basically a pact, a mutual pact that benefits both institutions. So we have, in this case, for example, one conservation effort is gonna, for example, protect a specific ecosystem, or is gonna respect the bans, or is gonna respect the recovery zones. But we are gonna support them as well with a little bit of funding or an alternative to fishing that is beneficial for the fishermen. So in the last 3 years, we worked with the community of Quetzalito and San Francisco del Mar with these conservation agreements. And this would be it for me. Just to complement, if you can see, each of the actions that I presented are supported with the recommendations that Stuart presented regarding Guatemala, like improving governance with the ban calendar, the participation of the community in each of the aspects that we mentioned is very important, because they're the ones that use the resource, and there's the ones that need the resources and the ecosystem to be okay. And of course, all of the monitoring efforts solidify the actions that we take. And as Antonella mentioned, for example, the Marfish efforts made this efforts regional, and so that we support all regarding monitoring and governance in a regional level. That would be all from me, and I am open to answering any questions. Thank you very much, Silha, for your presentation. Thank you, Antonella and Stuart, as well. I don't know if there are any questions or comments that you want to ask the speakers. We are opening the space so that you can um, do them. Or if anybody else has any additional comments, you can add them as well. We're going to give the word to Miguel. You can open your microphone and talk to us. Good morning to everyone. Very, very interesting, the three presentations, and I think very well linked because obviously part of the conservation effort has to come with the work with the community. And like and you have to find a way to be on their good side. And just as a comment, mostly for Stuart, and that I know him and we have worked in different matters. It would be a good moment to be pushing some of the modifications regarding regulations that you use for the species. For example, for the groupers in the Caribbean, because we now know that there is a good link with IMIPAS, which is in charge of the technical and scientific information in Mexico for fisheries and aquaculture. So if we already have the support and through some of the zonifications, if we can ask for modifications or implementation of some of additional measures to protect these species, it would be very interesting, and we could be able to do it. And we're talking about fishing refuges, and some are in development process, but we need to check what species are contemplated. If we have some species that are not being contemplated, if we can achieve an agreement with these organizations to try to include them, to start advancing, because we already have a lot of information regarding this. A few years ago, in another meeting, another person from Ecosur had commented some specific ideas, and sadly, this wasn't solidified. And well, maybe even together as a group, we will have more strength to propose these changes, because the numbers are each time looking more drastic, and we need to start working, try to standardize measures with the neighboring countries, with species that are obviously migrating species and that are shared amongst countries. So be able to standardize protection methods to have a larger effect on these populations, on these species that we share with other countries. And that on one side, and on the other side with community participation, we have the different committees of the management of the zones, and we think that we could also be working with other ways. For example, in Yucatan, we already have management committees of the different species. So the question would be to develop specific subjects to improve this part. It's just this. Thank you all for this. I assume that you are going to share the presentations. Yes, we will be sharing the presentation, all the documents. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Excellent presentations. Thank you very much. Thank you, Miguel. Yes, just to as context, yes, we've had this discussion with Ecosur, with Eloy Sosa, and it has a lot of time. It's been a lot of time, and well, in a time where we didn't have a lot of justification to generate a change, but we're at a period where we already have this information and we can generate change, and it's something that we can start working on again, and start talking with fishing cooperatives in Quintana Roo to see about their interest in participation. But yes, we can definitely take it on again. Thank you, Stuart and Miguel. Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay. If we don't have any more questions, then we thank you all again for joining us. We are going to share all the documents with the policy recommendations, as well as some infographics that you can also share in your communication media. And we hope that you can um, we hope that we can have some agreements between the organizations that work in each of the countries so that we can continue strengthening and working together to achieve these recommendations. So thanks again for everything. If you have any more questions, you can write it on the chat or to communicate it directly with us so that we can talk to the speakers and get your answers.